Here's the final video of finishing up a 16-foot waterfall estuary table after the resin pour. After burning out the rivers with high voltage electricity and inlaying it with resin, it took about a week for it to cure. Once it hardened, I was able to release the support beams and break loose the epoxy dams. The dams were wrapped in polypropylene tape and sealed off with silicone, so they released easily from the resin. The table without the legs attached weighed around 600 pounds, so we used a 2,000-pound overhead winch to move it around the shop. The first step in the finishing process was to surface the top completely flat. It was such a long piece that it didn't fit on the router surfacing table completely, so we surfaced it in two separate steps. The router surfacing machine uses a 2-inch cutting head with 3 carbide blades that runs at a very high RPM. It's able to shave off thin layers from the top surface up to a thousandth of an inch each pass. After the tabletop was finished, I started surfacing each waterfall leg to be the exact same thickness. Now it's ready for the sanding process. I start with a direct drive sander using 80 grit to remove any of the step over lines from surfacing, followed by a random orbit sander that's less aggressive. Before we get too far into the sanding process, I needed to attach the legs. After making miter cuts on the table and the legs, we used a joiner to drill holes to install dominoes. Because the table surface has resin inlays, we used a tabletop epoxy to bond the dominoes and to join the waterfall legs to the table. Compared to wood glue, this will make sure that there's no seam where the two resin inlays meet between the top surface and the leg. We installed both legs at the same time, upside down, and we used 16-foot clamps underneath the table and 4-foot clamps on each leg. Once we sanded the entire table to 400 grit, we went ahead and raised the grain with water and then resanded it with 400 for the final finish. By raising the grain and then resanding, you make sure that the final finish will be smooth. I used an oil wax finish that I use on a lot of my tables because it's very robust and it gives it a natural look on the wood. On the first coat, we go heavy and apply a lot of it as it soaks into the wood grain. After removing any of the excess, we allow that to cure and then rough it back up with Scotch-Brite to apply the next coat. Usually 3 to 4 coats is plenty, but you can do more depending on your liking. After the final coat has hardened, then I can start wet sanding and polishing out the resin. Starting at 500 grit, I wet sand all the way up to 8,000 grit before starting the buffing compounds. It can be a long and tedious process with multiple passes on each grit to ensure that you don't have any deep scratches left behind when you start to polish. But once complete, you have a matte finish left on the wood and a high gloss finish on the resin. This was the largest waterfall table I've ever made, and with the legs added in, it's over 22 feet of surface area. Although it took a lot of planning and months of hard work, it was great to see it finally come alive.